I have literally found the best way to do form validation both on the server side and client side in Next.js. Imagine beautiful wet error messages. Yes, I really just called wet error messages beautiful. What the hell is wrong with me? But whatever, they appear instantly when your users mess up. And on the server side, we send beautiful toast notifications to let the user know if the submission was successful or not. And don't they look beautiful? And you know what? This video is more important than ever, because with server actions, you're now exposing a public endpoint. And now, do you want to see how to implement this magic? I think so. So without any further ado, let's roll the video. Let's go! So right here I have created a little example, and this form has zero validation. No client-side validation, no server-side validation. Don't believe me? Let me show it to you. If I click on submit, we just submitted the form. Because if I go back to my code base and open the terminal, we did a post request. So let's again go back. We have this form. I can input a title, a description, and a status. If I go back to the code example, we have our export default function with the return statement. We have our card, and in the card we have a form. For the form, we have an action. This is create job. Create job is in server action. This means I have an actions file. Inside of there, I mark the file as use server. Then I do my export async function. I get my form data, which is quite important. And then I get my title, description, and status from my form data. At the end, I do my mutation, in this case, a console log. This means if I go back and for the title, I enter Jan and click on submit, we do a post request. And if I open my terminal, you see first of all post 200, it was successful. And then you see Jan. This means we console log the title. Now you might say, okay, Jan, we don't want that, right? We want to have validation. But instead of doing custom validation, server-side validation, client-side validation, what is if we just use the required property? This means for our input, we can add a required property. For our text area, the same, required. And for select, let's also add required. And as in default, this is true. This means if I go back and click on submit, we see please fill in this field. Okay, we now have client-side validation, but now we have two problems. First of all, it looks quite ugly. I would rather have some sort of red text right here which says, hey, fill out this title or something like that. And secondly, we don't have any server-side validation, because if you go back again and open your terminal, you see we do a post request. What does this mean? Well, our server action is a public endpoint. This means we have to validate our data, because if some sort of malicious user comes and attacks our website, this user would be able to create or pretty much fill out this form without using our UI. And if we don't validate the data on the server side, then who knows what this malicious user could do. This means we want to add client-side validation and server-side validation. Now, in the past, I always used conform.guide. This is a library which allows you to add client-side and server-side validation. I also created a lot of videos on this in the past, and it's a great library. But the problem is this library does not work right now with React 19. This means I had to look for other solutions, and I found an even better solution. So let me introduce to you React Hook Form. No, not React Hook Form, I guess kinda React Hook Form. But as you all know, I love shadcn UI. I use all of the components. As you see, I use the input, the description, text area, the selector. It's a great component library. But the thing is, validation was always kinda hard. But recently I tried the form component provided by shadcn UI, and it's a literal game changer. So the form component works on top of React Hook Form and Zod. So React Hook Form is a client-side form validation library. This means if you scroll a bit to the bottom to an example, you can click on submit, and then you have these error states. This is client-side validation. Currently, it does not look very nice inside of here, but we will make it look very beautiful. But the thing is, React Hook Form helps you with the form, but you still need some sort of type-safe schema validation library. And that's why we will use Zod. Zod is in TypeScript first schema validation library with static type in inference. I hope I pronounced this correctly. But at the end of the day, what we'll do is we will create a Zod schema. In the Zod schema, we will say, hey, I want to get in title, I want to get in description, etc. And then the type is either string or number or boolean. We have a minimum character length, etc. etc. We will then use the Zod schema both on the client side and server side and validate our form data against this Zod schema, which is completely type safe. So let's do that. Let's first of all install this form component. This means if you scroll a bit to the bottom, we have the installation command. I can copy this, open my terminal, I will stop my dev server and paste it inside of here. And with this form installation, we automatically import first of all the shadcn UI components, which are needed. We install React hook form and we also install Zod. So right here it says, hey, this already exists. Yeah, let's overwrite it. Let's also do it right here. And now we are finished. And now we can implement it. And maybe one question which you have right now is, hey Jan, why should we use the form component provided by shadcn UI and not the native React hook form component installation? Why don't we just use it natively? Good question. At the end of the day, the shadcn form component is very well integrated with the shadcn components itself. This means if you use React hook form natively, you have to create all of the styling yourself. Again, the label, the input, the margin, stuff like that. With React hook form, with the form component, everything is already added. We add the form item, our form control, in the form control, our input, then we have our form description and the form message. The form message is the error message. This means we don't have to add any styling and everything is done for us automatically. So let me show you the setup. Let's go back to our page.tsx and inside of here we want to first of all create our Zod schema. Now you can create it in this file, this is fine, but we want to use best practices. So in the app folder I will create a new folder, utils, and in the utils folder I can create a Zod schemas.ts file. So inside of here we want to first of all import Zod, so we can destructure Z from Zod, and now we can create a new schema. So let's do an export constant. This will be our block schema and this will be equal to z.object. We can invoke it and destructure it. Inside of here we want to now add all of our fields. What fields do we have? Well, if you go back, we have the title, description, and status. Let's start with our title. What type is it? Well, it's of type string. So this means that the title will be equal to z.string. Let's invoke it. Then let's do further validation. I want to have a minimum character length. How about 3? So minimum 3. And let's add an error message. For the error message, title must be at least 3 characters. Let's maybe also do a maximum validation. So .max, and we want to have a maximum character length of, let's say 50. Why not? And for the error message, let's say title must be at most 50 characters. Then what else do we have? We have the description. So let's create our description. And what type is it? Is it number, boolean? No, it's string. So z.string, we can invoke it. Let's do further validation. This means .minimum, and I want to have a minimum character length of 10. Then for the error message, description must be at least 10 characters. And let's also do a .maximum. So maximum character length, and this will be, let's say 500. And for the error message, let's do the same. So now we have our title, description, and now there's one more thing missing, and that's our status. So let's get our status right here. And what type is status? Is it of type string? I mean, it kinda is of type string, right? Because at the end of the day, the selected value, for example, published, is a string. But we also kinda have a enum, right? Because if you go to the page.tsx and scroll a bit to the bottom, we only have 3 options: published, draft, and archived. This means inside of here, we can do z.enum. Z.enum is an array, and inside of here, we have 3 values: published, draft, and archived. At the end of the day, you can also use .string, .minimum. It works, it's fine, but this is better because this is more type safe. So now we are finished with our Zod schema, and now we can go back to our page.tsx and set up React hook form. So first of all, we want to set up our form. So let's do a constant form, and this will be equal to use form. Use form is imported from React hook form, and then we want to invoke it and destructured. Inside of here, we want to add a resolver, and this resolver will be equal to Zod resolver, and then we want to invoke it and pass our block schema as an argument. Let's also import our Zod resolver. It does not import automatically, so let's do it manually. On top, I can do an import Zod resolver, and this is imported from hook form resolvers Zod. What is a Zod resolver? Good question. So at the end of the day, this resolver tells React hook form to validate all of our data against our Zod schema. Our block schema is the Zod schema, and we want to validate the data which we get from our inputs against this Zod schema. And the nice thing is, if this validation fails, we will get an error and it won't allow the user to submit the form. So now we have our resolver, and now we want to also add default values. This is an object, and inside of here we want to get our title, description, and our status. But here's the thing, we use TypeScript, right? This means I want to get types, but I don't get them. What's the problem? Well, we want to add a generic. For use form, we can add a generic, and inside of here we can do z.infer, then we can add another generic, and this will be type of block schema. Let's also import z from Zod, and now if we go to the default values and click on Control spacebar, we get all of our values. Now for the default values, this will be always empty. This means for the title, this will be an empty string. Then for our description, this will be the same, empty string. And for our status, we have to add a default value of either archived, draft, or published. So let's select draft, and now we don't have any errors anymore. So quick question, why do we need default values inside of here? Well, this is a good question. You need default values because React hook form works with controlled inputs. This means with default values and then the onChange handler which updates the state. If it would be uncontrolled, then of course you wouldn't need the default values. So now we are finished with this, which means we can now connect our form with React hook form. So let me copy this form element. I will copy it, don't delete it please. And now we can get our form component. This is imported from the components, and then we can paste our form. But our form now gets an error. What's the problem? Well, at the end of the day, we want to connect the state from our form with React hook form. This means for the form component, we want to spread our form itself. This is internal state. This at the end of the day just connects React hook form with our internal form inside of here. Then for our form itself, we want to for now delete the action. We will add something else later on. And now we want to finally connect our input to React hook form, if this makes sense. So in our form, we have our div with the label and input for our title. I will comment this out because we won't need the div and label anymore. This is just extra code, which we don't need with the form component. And we want to get the form field component imported from the components, and this is self-closing. And the first thing we have to add is our control, and this will be equal to form.control. Then we want to add our name, and this will be equal to our title, right? Because this is later on how we will get the form data, or in other words, this is the value of Zod, if this makes sense. And then we want to get the render prop function inside of here. This is pretty much like an arrow function, but we want to return it instead. And then in my params, I can also destructure it, and I want to get my field. Inside of here, we want to get a form item imported from the components, and in the form item, I can get a form label. For the form label, this is our title, right? And if I save this and go back, we have an error. What's the problem? Well, we use the useForm hook, right? And the useForm hook relies on a JavaScript bundle. This means we want to mark this page as useClient. You could also break this whole form into a separate component and mark the component as useClient. This also works. This is your personal choice. Let's now save it. Let's go back, and now we have our label. Now we are missing our input. So underneath the form label, I want to get my form control. And in the form control, I want to finally render the input. This is self-closing. Let's give it a placeholder, and for the placeholder this will be enter your title. But we're still not finished, because this input is still not connected with React hook form. So how do we do that? Well, for our input, we can now spread our field, so ... field. With this, we now connect React hook form with our individual input. This is the internal state which works together, because at the end of the day, this is a controlled input, right? We have our default value on top, title, empty string, and with this ... field, we now add the default value. We will listen for an on change and stuff like that. We don't have to write it manually. As you see, no default values, no on change handlers. Everything is abstracted away with React hook form. Then underneath our form control, we want to also get like a little form description, and I will say something like, I don't know, please enter your title. And we want to also get our form message. This is the error message. This is self-closing. And if I now save this and go back, you now see the title. We have the input and our description. Let's now do the same for our description input text area. This means I will just copy this form field. I can paste it down below. Then we can comment out this text area div. We don't need it anymore. And for the form field, let's first of all change the name to description. For the label, this will be also description. Instead of having an input, we want to now get a text area. And instead of saying enter your title, we want to say enter your description. We want to spread our field, and we want to update the description itself, the form description. I can delete this comment. I don't need it anymore. And if you now go back, as you see, we have our title and the description input or text area. What you should also see is that we have automatic margin. So our input has automatic margin to the label itself. The same is true for our text area. Let's now do the same for our select. So I will copy paste our form field. Let's paste it down below. Let's update the name. Instead of description, this will be status. For the form label, I want to say status. And now the question comes, how do we now render the select inside of here, and how do we connect our select with React hook form? Good question. So what we can do is first of all delete the form control. We don't need it anymore. Then underneath the form label, I want to get my select component. And for the select component, we want to now, as already mentioned, connect it to React hook form. Now you don't do it by spreading our field. This does not work. Instead, what we want to do is add an on value change. This will be equal to field on change. And we want to add a default value, which will be equal to our field.value. So inside of this example, we have to pretty much do the manual work, but nevertheless, it's still relatively easy. As you see, we add the default value, on value change, and now this is connected to React hook form. Then in the select, we can again get our form control. In the form control, I want to get my select trigger. And in the select trigger, I want to get my select value. And inside of here, we will just give it a placeholder. And this is also self-closing. And for the placeholder, we will say select a status. So if you save this and go back, you now see the status. But currently, if I click on it, nothing happens. This means we want to now also add our select content. So underneath the form control, we can get our select content. And to be honest, I can just copy paste it. So I can get my select content inside of here. I will copy it and paste it inside of here. I can also delete this old div with our select. We don't need it anymore. And if I save this and go back, you now see that this also works. And now here's the interesting thing. If I click on submit, we do a hard refresh. We do a get request. So let's update that. As mentioned, we already deleted the action from our form, right? So what do we do now? Do we again add an action? No, we want to use the onSubmit handler and we want to call a function. So above our return statement, we want to do a function which will be called onSubmit. I can invoke it and open it. Inside of here, in our params, we want to get our data, right? Now, what is our data? Some sort of form data? Some sort of object? No, we know what our data is. Our data is our block schema. This means we can get values, and values will be of type z.infer, type of block schema. And now the nice thing is everything which will run in this function is type safe, because when this function runs, then this means that all of the data is type safe and validated. So this means for now we can just do console.log and we want to console log our values. Then we can use our onSubmit. This means if I go to my form, I can add an onSubmit handler and this will be equal to our form.handleSubmit. Let's invoke it and I want to paste my onSubmit function. So the name onSubmit. Okay, so now we are finished and this should work. This means if I save this and go back and click on submit, Is this an error message? Yes, this is client-side validation. So if I go to my title and just add one character, it says title must be at least 3 characters. If I add too many characters, as you see right here, it says title must be at least 50 characters. The same is true for our description. If I add enough values, then everything is fine. If I overdo it, so let me do it quickly. So this is a very dynamic client-side validation and it works beautifully. Our label is red and the form message itself also has a red color. So the user instantly sees that there's some sort of problem inside of the form. The status does not throw an error and that's because we have a default value, right? This is the draft. Something has already been selected. If I go to published, again, we don't have any error. Again, because we have something selected. So now if I fill this form out correctly, so just some description and for the title, I don't know, super cool blog. And if I click on submit, you will see that if I go to my inspector and to the console, we have one object. Let's make it a bit bigger. And in the object, we have the description, the status and the title. And as mentioned, if it console logs, then this means that the data is type safe, that everything works as expected. So client-side validation is now finished. But again, if you remember, we had our server action and I want to now call the server action and create my mutation. This means I can go back to my page.tsx and underneath the console log, we can do an await and I want to call my function, which is create job. I want to import it, invoke it, and as an argument, I will pass my values. Inside of here, we now get quite a few errors. First of all, this should be an async function. Okay, and now we get an error for our argument. So it says, hey, argument of type this and this is not assignable to form data. So how do we fix that? Well, you should know how to fix it. We have our values, which is of type z.infer type of block schema. I can just copy it and paste it inside of here in the params. So we don't expect form data anymore, but we now expect values, which is of this type. Let's import our block schema, and I want to also import Zod. So now this is added, which means I can delete my constants, so my form data.get, I don't need it anymore. And then for my console log, I can just add my values.title, right? No, this does not work. Inside of here, we want to now compare our form data, our values, against our Zod schema. We want to do server-side validation. As mentioned, server actions are public endpoints. Most people don't know it, but at the end of the day, you want to protect them like API routes. And this also means that you want to do server-side validation. Right now, we did client-side validation. And for server-side validation, we want to create a new constant, result, and this will be equal to our block schema. This is the Zod schema dot save pass. And as an argument, we want to provide our values. So inside of here, we now take our values and we compare them against our Zod schema. Now this result could either be successful, so everything was fine, everything compared correctly, or it could throw an error. And if it throws an error, we want to return an error message to our front end. So we can do an if check and we will say, hey, if result is not equal to success, then let's open this and I want to return an error message. We will do a status of error and I want to also provide a message and I will say, hey, something went wrong. In theory, you could also do a result.error.message. This is also fine. So result.error.message. So once we are finished with this if statement, we know that our data is type safe. This means we can now do our console log. So this will be console log values.title. Then we have our values.description and values.status. Let's also return a success message. Let's again add a status of success and a message of block created successfully. So inside of here, I can now do an if statement and I can say, hey, if the result.status is equal to error, then let's console log the error message. If it was successful, let's console log the success message. Let's now save this. Let's go back. I will do a hard refresh. Let's click on submit. Okay, we have our error messages. For the title, Jan Marshall. For the description, some gibberish. And for the status, published. If I now submit this and again go back and open my terminal, we now see Jan Marshall, gibberish, gibberish, and published, of course. And if you open the console, you should see inside of here, block created successfully. Nice. And now there's honestly only one more thing which I want to show you. Instead of console logging our result, how about we show in toast? So in shadcn UI, we can search for Sona or sauna, who knows. This is a toast library, which looks beautiful, at least in my opinion. So we can install it. I will copy it, open my terminal. I can stop my dev server, paste it inside of here. This will install it. So this has been now installed. And now we want to go to our layout. Then underneath our children, we want to get our toaster from our components. This is self-closing. Let's add a close button and which colors. And then in our page.tsx, instead of console logging it or console logging the result, we can do a toast.error, and for the message, this is result.message, and for the success toast, let's also do a toast.success result message. Okay, let me delete the import for the label. Let's save this and let's test it out. Okay, so for the title, John Fisher, for the description, some gibberish, and let's click on submit. And what is this? Is this a toast? Yes, this is a toast. Great everyone, success. We now have client-side validation and server-side validation, and that's exactly what we wanted, right? And you know what? Maybe I should also show you the error toast. So let's go back to our actions. Instead of passing our values, let's pass an object and let's pass a title of empty string, or I will just say John. If I save this and go back and click on submit, we have an error message, an error toast. And if we go back and open the terminal, you also see there's no console log. That's because in the page.tsx, or in the actions, we got our result. We saw, hey, this does not look correct. We're missing a few values. So it wasn't successful, and we returned our error message. Now you could also format your error message and stuff like that. You could do a lot of things. We won't do it in this video. Nevertheless, you see how easy it was and is. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. You now know how client-side and server-side validation works, and you also know how to combine it with shadcn UI for the perfect result. And yeah, now I hope you don't forget to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to my heart, so please do it. And I hope I can see you in the next video. This would also mean a lot to me and my heart. So now enjoy your day and bye. Whew, my friends, as I always say after the video, grab a water, drink something, and yeah, I guess that's all. I will see you in the next video. I think the next video will be some sort of tutorial, maybe like in Learn Next.js 15 or TypeScript. I'm not sure, but it will be a tutorial. So yeah, see you. Bye bye.